Good evening, everybody. My name is Liz Castaldo, and I'm the studio coordinator at the Center for Book Arts. Please just note that this conversation is being recorded and will be archived on our YouTube channel. We ask that you keep your microphones muted for the duration of the event, but we invite you to post questions and comments in the chat. Closed captions are available by clicking the live transcription button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for an artist talk with Betsy Stirratt, which is in conjunction with her current solo exhibition, Veiled Taxonomies. The exhibition explores the fractious relationship humans have with the preservation and interpretation of nature. Employing the book as the center of this investigation, Stirratt examines how plants, animals, and humans are represented in museums and collections, and how they are preserved, classified, and displayed. Betsy Stirratt, a native of New Orleans, has exhibited her paintings, books, objects, and installations widely since 1983. She has had solo exhibitions at the Mutter Museum, the International Museum of Surgical Science, and galleries and museums in Chicago, Nashville, and Cincinnati. Her work has been included in group exhibitions at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, White Columns, and Art in General, among many others. She is the recipient of a Visual Arts Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts and awards from the Indiana Arts Commission and the American Craft Council. Stirratt is founding director of the Grunwald Gallery of Art in at Indiana University in Bloomington. She has curated the exhibits Personal Selections from the Robert J. Schiffler Collection, Human Nature, and more recently, State of Nature, Picturing Indiana Biodiversity. She has edited several books and catalogs, including Reimagining Science, Indiana University Press 2017, Framing Beauty, Intimate Visions, Grunwald Gallery, Indiana University from 2017, Human Nature from the School of Fine Arts Gallery, Indiana University 2007, and Les Vérités du Sexe, Editions Marval, Paris, France, French-German editions 2003, and Feminine Persuasion, Indiana University Press, Bloomington, Indiana, 2003. This program would not be possible without the support of New York State Council on the Arts, with the support of Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature, and by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, and by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts. We would also like to acknowledge the support from our vibrant community. While donations tonight are not expected or necessary, it is certainly appreciated. I'll now turn it over to Betsy.
Hi, welcome. I'm glad to see everybody here tonight. This is a great treat for me. I get to talk about my work, which is really nice because I often am talking about other people's work. And so this is really terrific. I'm going to, first of all, thank everybody at the Center for Book Arts for, first of all, exhibiting my work, but also having me speak tonight. It's been wonderful to work with them. It's an incredible organization and so professional, so amazing, and just have incredible energy and passion for what they do. So I want to thank them very much for including me in this exhibit. I'm going to start out by just talking about a little bit of work that I do as a curator because it really interfaces quite significantly with the work that I do for my own creative practice. I think what I'll do now is maybe share some slides. So let me do that. Okay, let's see, there we go. Okay, this is a show, and as Liz just mentioned, an exhibit that is fairly significant because it includes contemporary art and also natural artifacts. And as you can see, or possibly see behind me in my installation at the Center for Book Arts, the natural world is really important to me. I am very interested in the way that museums and collections, first of all, collect artifacts, but also the way they classify them and arrange them and the way they mark them so that we can try to understand what they have, what the significance of these items are. So this exhibit this is just a quick, I'm just going to show you a couple of quick installation shots of this exhibit. As you can see, there's a mastodon skull there, some other items, some contemporary art pieces, and different items from artists from all over the country. The show is really about Indiana biodiversity, and it looked at trying to show the past, present, and future about biodiversity in this state. Okay. Additionally, we always do a catalog with our exhibits, at least the significant ones, and I would love to do one for every show that we do, but in this case, this is what the exhibit catalog looks like, which is just about to come out now. So the book has been really important to me over the years, working in my own creative practice, but also in my work as a curator. This is a shot from a show of work by Buzz Spector that we had at the Grunwald Gallery several years ago, called Off the Shelf. And it was a great opportunity for us to work with Buzz and organize this show of installations of books that we borrowed from the libraries at IU, Indiana University, where I work. It was magnificent because people could interact with the books as sculptural objects. We got to interact with students who helped with the installation process. And so it was pretty exciting. So the book is really important in terms of that work at the gallery, but also my own creative practice. And it's been significant for a number of years. This is a piece that I did quite a long time ago that included handmade paper, plant material, and also letterpress printing with words written by me. It was a study of plant life within our greenhouse that we have here at IU. It's a pretty nice conservatory, and I went and collected these sort of plant materials, photographed them, and made paper with those plants. So this book really was sort of set the tone for many of the books that I've created over the years that also interface with other works that I'll show you as we move forward. Another book here just sort of highlighting the fact that painting is also something that I utilize within many of the books that I make, and a lot of the works on paper that I do. So this one happens to be a study of different skin diseases that I had been researching, and it was part of a larger body of work called La Maladie, as you will see as we move ahead. And that is a painting series. So books kind of interface with a lot of the other creative work that I've been doing, painting, photography, sometimes object making. Here's a cover of what I was just speaking about, La Maladie, which is this series of paintings that is really about our mortality. And the research behind these paintings really was the beginning of my work with archives. I would go in to medical libraries and find old illustrations and sort of alter them to my needs and then make a painting about it. They also include text, which is kind of hard to read here, but in any case, it was really looking at the idea of beauty and repugnance in the same image. I think medical illustrations tend to, of course, they're used for a purpose, but they really reflect a lot about the culture that is sort of publishing those illustrations. So for instance, if I would look at a book that was published in Mexico, it might have very different gestures and different poses of the cadavers than one that was made in or published in Japan. So that was sort of a body of work that happened in the 90s. And this is work that was shown at the Mutter Museum and the International Museum of Surgical Science. Let's see. So this is the installation at the at the Center for Book Arts. So it includes things that are important to me, which are photographs of objects from collections and interfacing those objects or those items with books or book-like objects. If if you go to museums, and maybe natural history museums or medical museums or all those places, you'll notice that often the items have multiple labels or tags that describe how the samples were gathered, who gathered them, what the curators understood at the time about the objects. And sometimes they don't have anything and nobody knows really what they are, but often they will be marked with something. And I was very curious and interested in how that handwriting and that numbering system and that the way that things were organized and categorized. So it's sort of with the growth of scientific knowledge, some of these descriptors and classifications prove to be inadequate or inaccurate, and the ordering they impose is unwarranted. Nevertheless, the labels become part of the objects to which they refer, and often their placement is integral to the object, if not more important than the object itself. So these tell multi-layered stories about what these objects are, where they come from, and help us to understand a bit more about nature. So for several years, I traveled to many collections in Europe and in the US. I went to natural history collections. I went to botanical archives. I went to museums that were mostly about medical pathology museums. I went to zoological collections and went and documented things that I saw. Documented through photography, but also documented by writing about how it felt to actually look at some of these items. Sometimes you could just tell they were displayed inappropriately or not sensitively to how they were collected. And I think that that is an interesting sort of thing to bring up right now, because there's so much questioning going on about museums and about how we collect, how we organize things within a museum for display, for human consumption. This is a shot of the Kew Gardens, and I just liked it because they were sort of marking every single type of moss on this rock. Another really interesting collection that I went to was the Neren in Vienna. This building was built in 1784. It was the first mental hospital built in continental Europe. It was built as this tower that housed psychiatric patients in individual cells, illustrating the stigmatization of the mental patients. So this is what one of the cell doors look like. Okay, but it's used now as a medical museum. So there are collections there of all kinds of things there were some pretty old specimens there of organs, and there's a lot of wax models and all kinds of things that have to do with pathology and medicine in general. But I think it was actually really very interesting to see the building itself because of the way that it was designed, and it wasn't designed for this purpose, but yet it sort of lent a specific, I guess, feeling to reviewing these remains that are here. Other places that I went were in different cities. This happens to be from a museum in Leiden. It's really, really old plant specimen. Dublin, Budapest, Bologna, Padua, and London. There's a lot of these museums out there, and many of them are not open to the public. And so I had to ask if I could get permission to review the materials, to look through the materials, to photograph the materials. And sometimes the answer was no. Sometimes the answer was yes, but but it sort of brought up the whole idea about how museum and archive curators are very protective of their items. They don't want people to manhandle their stuff, and they don't know how we're going to use it. So I had to sign quite a number of releases saying that I wouldn't, publish it commercially or any of that stuff, but also that, all credit would be given, obviously, for any images that I've used. So books like this, Humanity, which is a book that I created sort of after some of these trips, sort of highlighted sort of the decrepitude of some of these collections. This one happens to be on the St. Bart's Pathology Museum here, which is a really old pathology museum, fascinating stuff. That curator really didn't like me and she was not happy that I was there, but yet, nevertheless, she let me take pictures. So that was great. But the big question is, of course, these are human remains. And so how were these human remains collected is the big question. And I can rightly see why they would be concerned with someone, first of all, being interested in it. And secondly, photographing it. You don't know what someone's going to do with it. So, but it brings up the question of many of the items in some of these collections were the result of colonization, entitlement, and disregard for human life. So thing is, some museums now are actually putting personalities or human beings in connection with these remains that exist there. The Mutter Museum is actually doing that, doing a very good job of that, of creating stories. Through research, finding stories about the people that donated many of the items to their collections. So I think that's a fantastic way to approach it. And as many of you may be aware, there are a lot of stories about museums that are having to repatriate a lot of the human remains. But I just want to mention, I don't only photograph human remains. I also was going to botany museums and, zoology collections and things like that. So that was just one aspect of what I was working on. So here's another spread from that book, which is Humanity. It's fascinating the way that things are displayed, to me, the kind of labeling. And, many of these preparations were produced by students in the medical schools. And that's the way that they would learn about, and I like this, I have nice hair on top of this image I noticed. That's the way that people, the medical students would learn about the body. So this is an installation that I made a couple of years ago called Regimes of Disorder. And it combines many of the items that I've been speaking about, photographs from some of the collections, plant remains of things that I've personally collected. On the wall there is a image of, or it's actually the leaf of the corpse flower, one of the corpse flowers, if anybody knows what that is, that bloom only every now and then. If you ever and they smell really bad. So I was able to collect that flower and combining those with photographs of seaweed and plant life that I collected through sort of a citizen science kind of project in Ireland. So the citizen science idea is, I was drawn to it because it refers to some of the work that 19th century women did when they went to learn about the world. They would collect seaweed and create photographs from them. Well-known people. I would say Anna Atkins and Mary Howard would be the most well-known, but it was a pursuit that was popular at that time for women that were, of course, women weren't working. They were of a certain status, a certain, and that's how they were learning about science in the world. Also in this installation is some books, as you see, and also tracings, which is the wallpaper that you see here and is also behind me in the Center for Book Arts installation. So this piece, which is a combination of photographs and also tags and labels that I have made and formed in different patterns, just kind of focuses on the difference in the way that, I guess, labeling can create sort of a visual, I don't know, tableau, I guess is a good word to use. But these assemblages, they reflect techniques of classification. And I thought that this was a good way to impose order on the ideas that I had behind this installation. Okay, so this installation also includes some paintings, which is something that I also do, usually interacting with some of the other aspects of this with photography and writing. Let's see. Here's another shot of that installation. All the installations that I do are accompanied by a publication, and this is the cover for the one for that one. It's a small publication, but I always feel like it's important to document whatever happens in an exhibit, because you forget about it. That's the problem. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about another installation that I did at the Working Men's Institute in New Harmony, Indiana. New Harmony, Indiana is a, sorry, I can't find my notes about New Harmony right now. Just a second. There it is. Okay. New Harmony, Indiana is a utopian community in southern Indiana, and it's got a really interesting history. This happens to be the Working Men's Institute, and there were these organizations called Working Men's Institutes all over the country at that time. This is the 1830s, when they were hoping to educate the working man, and this is basically was a library and a learning center. Now it's a library and a museum. So it's an old style museum, and it has really a wide array of objects that were donated to the museum from the local people. So you'll see that in this picture here, there's a horse skeleton that was, there's a name, the horse was someone's horse, and there's a whole story about the horse in the museum. Additionally, you'll see there's a box here at the bottom, Old Fly's tail. That's a horse tail from a horse named Old Fly. And there's a lot of other objects in here that are really unusual. A two-headed calf that was, donated from somebody locally. There was all kinds of things. There's also things in the museum that were artifacts about the utopian communities. These communities were thought of, first of all, as, people were idealistic at that time, but they were also centers for learning and for especially learning about science. So what happened was the people all over the New Harmony would donate items, scientific items specifically. So this installation called Nature Mort took place in two locations. Part of it was in the Working Men's Institute, in New Harmony. And then the other part was in a contemporary art gallery in the same town. So we kind of took objects from the collections at the Working Men's and we moved them over to this contemporary art space here. And then we also, I created some interventions in the Working Men's museum. The museum is an old style museum, as I said, and as you'll see here, there's this, this is stuff people donated. It's not in the best of shape. Some of it is kind of falling apart. But it's a particular kind of place that's kind of been lost in most places, and it's that local museum. And I think that is something that I think is important, that, we don't want everything to become touch screens. So getting back to the actual items, the actual artifacts, I think is really important. What else? Let's see. So again, this installation was accompanied by a publication. This is what the publication looks like. Talks a lot about, all the words in my books are written by me. They're really about my musings about the way that nature and humans and nature get along and don't get along. And I also mentioned quite a lot about climate change, but I'm not specifically, the pieces are not specifically about climate change. They're about us appreciating what we have and trying to understand nature in a way that's much more, I guess, better than what we have now. So photography of items in all these collections was really important. Some of them were taken in situ in the collections or archives. Others I would collect as like the seaweed here, and I would bring it home and I would photograph it. Okay. I found that the seaweed specifically was so gestural and so beautiful that I not only wanted to photograph it, but I used it really as a sort of a reference point to create these, because I love the idea that this object can be a book-like thing. Of course, it's not a book, but it's a book-like thing because each of these tags has words on it. And if you put the words together in whatever order you want, you're telling a story, and you're telling a story about nature and collections. The idea of the knots and the tangles and the information in these works, I think references really the way we feel about nature and about the world itself. It's not only about the web of connections, but it's about the confusion that we have about our place in nature. This is a piece called Pathos, and it includes photographs from some collections, and again, a story. If you have the patience to put it all together, it'll tell you something. But you can also just like look at random words or phrases and learn what is on my mind by reading through these things. This is called The Zoologist. So I like the idea of not telling a straightforward story, but letting the gesture and the overall confusion and tangledness of it tell a story on its own, besides just reading something. So did some of these as well that are hanging books. They're also organization of information. These are images. On the back of each of these tags are words. So you can choose to read them in whatever way you want. This is one called Birds of Northern Europe. And it's organized by me because it's not really birds from Northern Europe. It's really birds from collections that happen to be in Northern Europe. So referring to the way that we I guess, categorize animals and any living thing. We always categorize everything. Humans do that. Try to understand it. So I'm kind of creating my own taxonomies in a way. Here's a detail of that. Also did some pretty traditional books about the this is the collecting series. I have to mention that all of these bindings were created by my friend Mary Uthapuru, who is an excellent bookbinder, because I could not do leather bookbinding. I know she did a much better job than I could do. So these books are really talking a little bit more about specific collections. There's a botany volume, there's a zoology volume, and a human anatomy volume. To me, a lot of what I wanted to do was find the oldest specimen I could possibly find, the oldest preserved plant that's stuck on a page that I could possibly find. I did find some pretty old ones. And that was really like a challenge for me. Part of this is also like the idea of going to these collections and coming away with not only the fact that you've seen these things, but the knowledge and understanding that you have collected an image of these things. And that to me is a very important part of this work. Is it's a form of collecting as well. And, you know, unfortunately, collecting is kind of like thought of as controlling, really. But something about it makes me think that by collecting these images, I know more. And I love that idea. Here's a shot in the same book from the Kew Gardens Spirit collection, which is a really interesting collection where they have everything in spirits, which are, you know, a lot of these things are in spirits, which are preservatives. And these are incredible. That was an incredible collection. More of botany collected. So getting toward the end here and talking about these objects, these book objects, which are starting to become more and more sculptural. These, I call them neuron objects because they remind me of the way neurons connect in the body, or the way the world connects to each other. But you notice that the knots and everything else still continue to create this tangled idea. These are sort of articulated 3D models, almost objects, word nets. And that's the way I think of them. And right now they're starting to accumulate. So I think that they're going to begin to accumulate more and more of these word nets. There is a story on the tags, but it's a minimal story. So the object is becoming more important, maybe than the words, although I can't give up the words yet. I'm not quite there yet. So I just kind of see the future, what's going to happen with these. They're going to just become these huge things. This one is called, I forgot the name of this one. It is called, I think it's called The Anatomist, I believe. Yeah, it is. So really a lot of this was experimentation as well, and how the lineage of this Irish linen that I use to create these objects can be used in different ways, what kind of knotting techniques there are, what kind of, how are the tags connected, where are they, what happens if you create a completely different structure with these. So a lot of it is a tactile kind of working with almost like a textile, or I don't know, like handwork type activity. And this is a very big piece, actually. Of course, there's no way to really display it because it's you can't really put it on the wall. You can't really put it on a giant pedestal, but it can also be balled up into a pile too. So, okay, this is my last slide. This is word collapse. It's in the show. It's behind me somewhere. Oops, wrong way. There it is. And again, I think the idea of the gesture here is so important for me that I understand the idea of words collapsing or disintegrating, or it's sort of a gestural finale, I would say, for this body of work. Sort of cumulative in both the use of the tags, the knots, the tangles, and the information. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Betsy. So great
Thank
to hear more
you.
about your work.
Okay.
So let's open up the floor for questions. If folks have questions, you can either put them in the chat or you can unmute and ask yourself if you want to.
She wants a close up.
I have a couple of comments and questions, if I may. I really enjoy your work, first of all. Thank you for sharing it. And it really is interesting to hear you speak about how you are making your own taxonomy, because it really does seem as though that is what you are doing very successfully. And I had a couple of comments. I think that sometimes when I'm looking at things in museums, doesn't it seem that the way something is presented, even if it's just a fragment, even in that fragmented state, it's even more powerful than the whole object?
Absolutely.
And
yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
I always like that. And then I also was wondering, this is a question that's a little bit aside, but I'm just curious. I had the opportunity one time to go to a church that had a number of relics in it. And I wondered if that was anything that you've explored.
Absolutely. No, I actually own some.
Okay.
I own some relics. They're small, but they're beautiful. Yes, I have definitely gone to many churches in Europe specifically to look at relics, and also some of the preserved bodies in the crypts, which are incredible. I mean, I think it's again the question of, how are these cared for? How are these protected? How are they, if they need to be repatriated? How is that going to happen? But of course, the people that are buried in the crypts wanted to be buried there. So that's good. That's a good thing. It's the people at the museums that often didn't have that choice. Yeah, so I love those. I love all that. And the fact that that is the way that people understood something about nature, in a sense, that they would look at these relics and understand that they would identify with that saint by looking at, this tiny bone from Saint Blaise's arm or something. Yeah.
I think that when I went to this church, one of the things that, I don't know if disappointment is the right word, but there was the way they were presented, sometimes they were overwhelmed by this little ornate case that they were presented in, that I couldn't get beyond the frame. You know what I mean? You can't really see this little tiny piece of bone very well.
Mhm.
So sometimes I really appreciate the more pristine presentation in some sort of a museum. But
Well, I guess it sort of sets the tone, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about today, in a sense. It's like, how are these things presented, and how it's the institution's decision about how to present those things. So within a religious context, the decision is to make this big deal out of this teeny little fragment by putting that frame on it, and then signifying that it's valuable and that it's important. And that's what those frames do. But within a museum curators do it differently. What they do is they put it behind glass or in a case. You can't touch it, you can't go near it. And then whatever text they include with it is going to can really change the way you feel about that object. And that's not only true of natural history stuff, it's true of art and everything else. So the museum curators and collections managers have a lot of responsibility there for the way things are perceived and understood.
well, thank you.
Thank you for the questions.
There's a question in the chat from Bobby, who asks, curious to hear more about the stories in the word webs. 1, are the stories narrative stories if they are put together? 2, are the stories also presented traditionally alongside the pieces, like in the catalog, or as part of the word web?
Thank you. That's a great question. The stories are, for the most part, narratives. They often will be about something. One reason why I'm interested in this stuff. Okay. So like, for instance, I forgot which book it's in, but there's one about when I was a child and grew up in Louisiana, and we would go to the parish fairs, and there would be a sideshow. There'd be sideshows there. And so it talks about how formative that was to see those sideshow displays. And I mean, some of them had human remains and things in them, because that's what people did back then, way back in the day, in the 60s. But how that's the kind of narrative story that would be within some of these books. Now, I never really published those except for in the traditional books. I don't have them anywhere, like from the word nets or anything else. They don't really exist anywhere except in my head. So it's like a puzzle. Thanks.
I have a question. Hi there. I'm actually originally from Indiana, so I appreciate the connection.
All right.
I went to New Harmony when I was a kid.
Oh, you did? Great.
Yeah. I guess I'm curious whether your access to all these collections, if that's coming from your role as a curator, are you usually approaching the museums and the collections in that role and then able to translate it into your personal work? Is that sort of an entree into the collections?
That's a great question. I actually have not used that, but what I have used is that I work at Indiana University as a faculty member. So I would always write a letter ahead of time, and then an email to, or whatever, with credentials. And then, many times people don't even answer you, even it doesn't matter who you are. But then if I had to pursue it, I had to be pretty persistent with many of them. And most people ended up being very helpful. But I'm pretty sure if I just said, I'm an artist and I'm interested in this, most places would not let me in, which is a shame but there are reasons for it. First of all, these museums, they don't have any time to deal with you. They're busy people. I don't blame them really in a lot of ways, but the best experiences are like if they say, oh, here's our interns, can you just let them show you around? And I was like, great, that's perfect, because the interns were always really excited about the collections. They wanted to show me things, and most of the curators were like, you know, I have other things to do. So it was yeah, I mean, I think it always helps to have institutional kind of backing, I guess. So,
And if I may, I have a follow-up. I personally have been really interested lately in touch and handling of work, and how museums and galleries, you know, typically are not set up to allow that kind of interaction. And you commented briefly on, you know, curators and museums being leery of allowing people to handle objects. Have you worked that into your work at all, in terms of, do you allow people to touch your work? Have you made any work that comments on that idea?
no, but that's a really interesting point to bring up. You know, it's a question with, like, the objects that are behind me in this exhibit, all of them can be touched. You know, the books can be touched. I want people to look through the books. On the other hand, you know, if you have let's say you have a edition of 3 books, you know, one of these ones that was bound, you know, leather bound books. So, you know, you're thinking, let's see, do I want this to get wrecked? Or, you know, you have to think about that kind of thing. But I've never done any work specifically about that. But I mean, I think that, like, the Neuron pieces are very touchable, you know. That's why I kind of really want to make some huge ones. I do have a couple of big ones, but not room size ones yet. So thanks. Anybody else?
The show, I'll have to check on the date. I can check.
I think it's June 14th or something
I know
like
this
that.
off the top of my head. Yeah, sometime in June, in the summer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Any last questions before we wrap up, or comments? Okay.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Betsy. It was so wonderful to hear more about your work. And thanks to everybody who joined tonight. A recording of the talk will be posted to our YouTube channel soon. So if you want to share it or see anything again, it'll be available.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your interest, and thanks for coming.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.